Here we are in week 11 of fantasy football. You've probably seen your ups. You've probably seen your downs. Maybe you've already been eliminated from playoff contention. Maybe you already secured the bye. But for those that are out there still fighting for their playoff life, allow me to motivate you. Allow me to inspire you. Allow me to be the reason, the energy that your team gets to move forward and propel and stack win after win after win after win. And I'm not just going to make it some ordinary cliche motivational speech for you. I'm going to back it up with info and intel as well. In week 11 now, I'm only giving you my must starts. We're done talking about each matchup across the league in every single game. So allow me to start and introduce the best and the must start players of fantasy football in week 11. Roll the goddamn intro. Going by position now, I'm going to give you the best matchups for each position. And we're going to start with the quarterback spot. The best matchup, the team that gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year, is the Dallas Cowboys, which brings up Geno Smith, who's going to play a home game in Vegas in a dome against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, this may be a little different since obviously we're considering what happened with the Dallas Cowboys and how very unfortunate that is. Prayers up to Marshawn Kneeland, his family, and the Dallas Cowboys organization as a Cowboys fan. Now let's continue talking about what we're really here to talk about, the Dallas Cowboys defense and how they give up the most fantasy points to all quarterbacks. No, I normally wouldn't say Geno Smith is a good start. However, if Russell Wilson can get this job done, if Justin Fields can get this job done, if Jacoby Brissett, all of these backup quarterbacks are shredding this defense, then why would we not assume that Geno Smith is going to have a day against the Dallas Cowboys? Don't be afraid to start Geno Smith. This is the best matchup across any matchup in Week 11 of the NFL. Does it concern me that Geno Smith hasn't really had a great performance yet in fantasy or real football, I should say, in the 2025 season? Yes, it does concern me, but I again state that backup quarterbacks this year have been shredding the Cowboys defense. A quarterback I'd feel a lot better about starting, though the matchup isn't better than the Dallas Cowboys defense. Aaron Rodgers is going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Bengals give up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterback. If Justin Fields can cook this team, why can't Aaron Rodgers at his age with his weapons cook the Cincinnati Bengals defense? Let's also keep in perspective here that the Pittsburgh Steelers have lost a couple games in a row now. They need to get a win to get back on track. And what better way than a defense that gives up points to every position? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, you name it. A quarterback we were starting regardless of how good the matchup is. But considering Justin Herbert is going up against the defense that gives up the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks in the Jacksonville Jaguars, Justin Herbert checks all the boxes this week. We can check off great quarterback. We could check off great matchup. Everything in this game tells us that Justin Herbert should have a phenomenal day. And no, you can't get Justin Herbert off your waiver wire. This still needs to be talked about as one of the premier matchups you can have as a quarterback this week. And that's why he's must start, on top of the fact that he's just so good. The next matchup I want to talk about at the quarterback position. J.J. McCarthy is playing the Chicago Bears this weekend. And while alter ego number 9 doesn't look that great in his return from injury, or even the entire season for that matter, the Bears give up the fourth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So if J.J. McCarthy was going to show us life, wouldn't it be this game against this defense? Mind you, in a scenario where they're going into the locker room and saying, listen guys, we need to get Justin Jefferson the football. I believe part of what led to J.J. McCarthy's struggles last week is the fact that the Vikings asked him to throw the ball 42 times, which is something that was never in the cards for anybody who drafted J.J. McCarthy, right? We expected a game manager at the NFL level. Alter Ego 9, however, this week has a great matchup against the Chicago Bears, and thus, if you need a quarterback, if you weren't able to get Aaron Rodgers, maybe you feel a little bit better about J.J. McCarthy than Geno Smith. I personally don't. Of course, I'm not a betting man. Gamble responsibly. But if you were to bet on this game, I would expect this game to go as follows, where J.J. McCarthy and the Vikings in a divisional matchup are going to put some serious pressure on the Chicago Bears. And this might not be a game that can be won in the fourth quarter if you're Caleb Williams. because they can't keep getting away with it. Let's just be honest. Tua Tagovailoa is playing the Washington Commanders, who allow the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. No, Tua Tagovailoa is not the prettiest name, but at least we've seen Tua Tagovailoa string together good games this year. They're playing in Madrid in Spain, and while it's not perfect weather, there should be rain in the forecast. It should be 50-degree weather, and that's, at least the temperatures aren't freezing enough to make me concerned about sitting Tua because of the weather. Against this defense, the Washington Commanders, that has allowed so many fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, opposing quarterbacks, Tua's in a great spot here if you need a spot start QB, and I think he should be started for those reasons. These quarterbacks may not have the best matchup that I'm going to speak about now, but quarterbacks that I love this weekend. Maybe you're not feeling frisky to play a Geno Smith or a Tua. I really like Joe Flacco against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is somebody that's played within the division and knows the Steelers, so I feel like there's going to be a level of comfortability on Joe Flacco's side and the Cincinnati Bengals. Mind you, it's also a great matchup for opposing wide receivers. We'll get into that later in the video. But let's continue with talking about other quarterbacks. I really like Jordan Love in a bounce back spot. And I know it's crazy. We just watched him play on Monday night. Could not move the football to save his life. Jordan Love is a lot better when the Packers are winning versus when the Packers are losing or in a close game. The Giants are without their head coach. They have Jameis Winston under center. Yes, anything can happen. Jameis is a wild card, but I would still expect the Green Bay Packers to win this game comfortably. And the last quarterback I love this week, Caleb Williams against the Vikings, does pique my interest a little bit just because he's been a fourth quarter player. This may end up being a close game. It could also not be. Caleb Williams and his rushing ability makes it hard to sit him on any given week, and I believe that this is a spot where you can play Caleb Williams as a top 10 quarterback. Let's talk about the running back position and what running backs have the best matchups this weekend. We're going to get right into it and start with the Pittsburgh Steelers running backs against the Cincinnati Bengals. And what a shocker. I keep bringing up the Bengals defense. Considering how poor the Bengals defense has been and fantasy friendly it is for our players that are playing against them, I consider both Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell as must-start running backs this week just because of the opportunity and game script that may lead to in this game. Next, let's talk about Josh Jacobs, who's going up against the New York Giants. The Giants give up the 2nd most fantasy points allowed to the running back position this year, even though last week was a situation where both Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift put out notable fantasy performances, or at least solid ones. This running back room is really just Josh Jacobs and only Josh Jacobs. Let's talk Ashton Jeanty versus the Dallas Cowboys. And again, I know I'm mentioning players that are being started in fantasy regardless, but this is a pattern. The Bengals and the Cowboys, you got to start your players against them. The Cowboys give up the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Ashton Jeanty, the one-man show, should have a monster day. Now let's shift our focus to the Texans running back room. Woody Marks and Nick Chubb, who are going up against the Tennessee Titans. They give up the 4th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Both Woody Marks and Nick Chubb are startable this week. Maybe you don't feel great about playing Nick Chubb. Maybe he's a low-end flex play, but I think you got to get him in your lineups regardless because the matchup is too good, and the game script should follow that as well. The Texans should win this game comfortably no matter who is under center for them. I expect this to be a game where the Texans are sitting on the ball. They have the lead. They got to chew clock. Here comes Woody Marks and Nick Chubb to get the job done for us. Also something to keep in mind. The Houston Texans cannot afford to lose if they want to go to the playoffs. This is a must-win game for them, and they get to play a one-win team in a must-win game. Sounds like it should be a good day for the running backs. The Buffalo Bills defense is giving up the 4th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back room, assuming Bucky Irving doesn't play, obviously, because if he does, we're not even going to mention Rachaad White or Sean Tucker in this game. Both of these running backs, if they play by committee, should have a great game against the Buffalo Bills. Rachaad White is a must-start player in this one, and I think Sean Tucker maybe should be left on benches, even though he's been better the last couple weeks than Rachaad White. It doesn't give me enough confidence or advise you, the viewers at home, to throw Sean Tucker out there into your lineups if Bucky Irving doesn't play. I think this is still the Rachaad White show. If for some reason you don't have one of those running backs or running back rooms that are giving up the top 5 most fantasy points allowed to the running back position, let's talk about some other players that I really like starting this weekend. like Quinshon Judkins. Baltimore's pass defense has been very good. The defense itself has been very good the last few weeks. But this is a Browns offense that is predicated on running the football without a lethal passing attack, thus making Quinshon Judkins a fine starting running back this week. Another running back that I am a fan of starting this weekend is Amari Demercado versus the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers, albeit don't have a top 5 matchup advantage for us, but they do allow the 9th most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. If this is someone sitting on your bench, maybe try to find a way to throw him in a flex spot. The Cardinals are going to be without their top pass catcher Marvin Harrison Jr., as we all know. So they may look to rely more on the run in this game, thus giving Demercado a boost in fantasy. Let's talk David Montgomery versus the Philadelphia Eagles. This is somebody that obviously plays in the committee behind Jahmyr Gibbs, but in the first 6 games of this season, David Montgomery hit 40% of snaps or more one time, and in the last 3 games the Lions have played, he's hit that number twice. They clearly are using David Montgomery more. This isn't a you should start David Montgomery because of a matchup situation. This is reading the tea leaves, reading that the Detroit Lions want to give David Montgomery more opportunities. That's a focus they've made coming out of the bye week, and they've shown us that. This gives me confidence in playing a David Montgomery, who's probably going to have a good, not great matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. I like David Montgomery in this spot just because he's playing more and more snaps. And as fantasy football players, we have to be able to read those tea leaves and adjust, where maybe David Montgomery was someone we wanted to bench 6 weeks ago. But that's not the case today. We need to start putting him back in our lineups confidently. Now let's talk about the best wide receiver matchups this week. Again, maybe you're starting to see a pattern, but the Dallas Cowboys give up the number 1 most fantasy points allowed to the opposing wide receivers. So what does that mean for Geno Smith and the Vegas Raiders offense this week? I really like Trey Tucker. I think he has to be played. And Tyler Lockett, if you're in a 14-man league, you could let that fly. You know that he's going to get some opportunities. Next, the Pittsburgh Steelers are giving up the 2nd most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. Now, what does this mean for us Jamar Chase and T. Higgins fantasy owners? That means you have either the number 1 or a top 20 guy in your lineup this week that you should feel really good about. Let's skip over the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position, as that would be the New York Jets defense against the New England Patriots. Hopefully we see that come to fruition. At the time of me recording this video, Thursday Night Football did not happen. I would expect Matt Collins, Stephon Diggs, maybe even Kyle Williams to get some good opportunities in this one. And we can laugh about that tomorrow when it's wrong. The 4th most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position is actually the Washington Commanders, which makes Jalen Waddle, who already is must start, maybe even upgrade him into that top 12 territory this weekend, because the Commanders' defense is just that bad. The Chicago Bears are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. This should be a get-right game for Jettas, who was obviously in your lineup regardless. Must start Jordan Addison, given this situation and matchup. If you don't have any of those wide receivers or are unable to grab them off waiver wire, let's talk about some other options that you can play this week, like Khalil Shakir versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs are maybe not the best matchup you could play against, but a very good one. Let's consider that Dalton Kincaid is definitely going to miss this game. He wasn't ruled out yet. I'm just assuming so. Give a bump in targets to everybody else. James Cook, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman. That gives me enough confidence to believe that Khalil Shakir will be must start. We've seen Khalil Shakir as Josh Allen's number 1 target last year. We know that it's there. We know the formula, the outcome, the possibilities are all there for us. And we get the matchup that helps us out. So I really like Khalil Shakir, and if you have him, find a way to get him into your lineup. This may impact, depending on injury, whether we play this player or not, but Darius Slayton, if healthy, is a must-start wide receiver. He's the most vet in that Giants wide receiver room. He's got Jameis Winston at quarterback. We got to be upgrading that. And we know that the Green Bay Packers defense cannot stop opposing wide receivers. So put all those 3 together, and what do we have? A must-start wide receiver, ladies and gentlemen. If, for some reason, Darius Slayton was a no-go, upgrade Wan'Dale Robinson, and he's going to be our must-start player. Finally, the tight end position. Let's talk about the teams that are giving up the most fantasy points allowed to this position, and we'll start right away with the Cincinnati Bengals. What a shocker, right? I would say if there's anybody you could play out of this Pittsburgh Steelers tight end room, though it's kind of confusing. You have Jonnu Smith, you have Pat Freiermuth, and you have Darnell Washington, Mr. 6'7" himself. I think Pat Freiermuth is the guy you got to be playing if you're going to pick any of them. Again, I don't really love any of these options, but let's consider that they do give up the most fantasy points allowed to this position. Somebody's got to pop off here. Being that he's a probable to play and has the questionable tag taken away from him, Oronde Gadsden is going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who give up the second most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Expect this guy to run wild, run crazy, and be the legend that continues of Oronde Gadsden, the guy you added off waivers that became your must-start tight end every week. Next up, let's talk Zach Ertz versus the Miami Dolphins. Zach Ertz maybe hasn't been as effective without Jaden Daniels in the lineup, but the Miami Dolphins defense give up the third most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. If there's anybody that you should feel good about starting on this list, let it be Zach Ertz. Even though we talked about starting a Pittsburgh Steelers tight end, if you don't feel good about that one, Noah Fant of the Cincinnati Bengals is playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who give up the fourth most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. We've seen Tucker Kraft dominate them in prime time. We've seen tons of tight ends have their best games against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if you didn't like any of those four names that I mentioned, allow me to recommend via Outlier 3 tight ends that I like to play this week, including Kyle Pitts, somebody that I'm personally starting myself with Tyler Warren on a bye this week. I think Kyle Pitts, considering Drake London has the questionable tag at the time of recording this video, I don't know if it went away. If Drake London misses time, you could even upgrade him even more. Theo Johnson against the Green Bay Packers, considering, again, Jameis Winston is getting the start at quarterback, there should be more opportunities for Theo Johnson. I get it, he's dropped some passes, some crucial passes for the Giants this year, but they're not going to stop looking his way. And if anybody's going to give him that positive enforcement or encouragement in this game, it's going to be his quarterback, Jameis Winston, who does it for anyone. And finally, I would not be shocked if Colston Loveland had a nice bounce-back game against these Minnesota Vikings. DJ Moore battling the questionable tag. Rome Odunze battling the questionable tag. They're going to need a pass catcher to emerge in this one. And if either one of those guys isn't 100%, put Colston Loveland down as one of their top pass catchers in this game. That's going to do it for our must-start players. We're attacking the best matchups in fantasy football this week, but let me know down in the comments below. Do you have any start-sit fantasy football questions of your own? Maybe Outlier Militia, the great viewers that you guys are, can help our friends out in the comments. We're a community here, we're a team, and we're all trying to win at the end of the day. No fantasy question is a stupid question. I love to interact and engage with all of you in the comment section. So if you have any questions, if you have any start sits, let me know down in the comments so we could have a discussion about it. And I better see Outlier Militia get to those comments before me. And if I don't, well, I'm not going to really do anything about it, but help our brothers out. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy, and I will see you in the next video. Wow, you stuck to the end of this video? Thank you so much. If you're new here, make sure you check out one of these videos on the screen right now. And don't forget, before you leave, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any fantasy football videos on this channel. That's all I got for you guys. I'll see you in the next one.